Hey y'all, it's me, Kevvie. We survived another year. Happy 2022, y'all. Here's to solidarity in the new year. Now that the holidays and the month of December are over, it's time for another monthly wrap-up for y'all, as well as some end-of-the-year statistics. But before we look at what I read, I have a few books I got as gifts this month that I gotta show y'all. The first gift I received was Volume 2 of the Love Stage manga from Rachel Fryman. She got me Volume 1 for my birthday and I loved it. So I'm really excited to read the next one. Thank you, Rachel! Oh, and by the way, y'all, Rachel is hosting 2 Golden Girls readathons starting in January. The first is a year-long readathon where each month you have a different prompt celebrating the Golden Girls. That's just 1 book a month, no stress. And then, to celebrate Betty White's 100th birthday, over her birthday weekend, January 14th through 17th, you're encouraged to read any books that have to do with White. Could have White in the title, be a White cover, be written by someone named White, be written about Betty White, or by Betty White. That's gonna be cute. And if you're wanting to participate in any of these, I'll have Rachel's readathon website in the description below. Next, I got The Cruelest Month by Louise Penny from my Aunt Jan. This is the 3rd book in the Three Pines series, an incredible, hard-hitting, cozy mystery series that Jan introduced me to. Still Life and A Fatal Grace are among my favorite mysteries that I read in 2021. Video on that subject to come soon. So I cannot wait to read The Cruelest Month. Thank you, Jan! Oh, and for all of you who enjoyed the video of my buddy read with Jan, we've selected our next buddy read book, and now we just have to set a date. So watch out for her return to the channel in the near future. Yay! I also received a book from transgender author DH Torkavian, who sent me a copy of her own book. It's called Fairywing, and it's about transgender witches. Ooh, that sounds so cool. Oh, I'm really looking forward to reading that one. Thank you. Finally, I received a handful of gift cards as Christmas gifts, which I used to purchase The Devil's Advocate by Steve Cavanagh, the most recent book in the Eddie Flynn series, Pisces by Melissa Broeder, the author of Milk Fed, about a lesbian mermaid romance. Ooh. And then Devil in the White City, an historical fiction novel about my favorite city, Chicago, and our World's Fair, and the murderer in the shadows of that event. Ooh, I'm so excited to read these. Thanks, y'all. Alright, time to get into my December wrap-up. I read 9 books this month, much less than I usually do, but with good reason. I'll explain that later. The first thing I read in December was Kurt Vonnegut's To Be or Not To Be. I saw Berna from Berna's Bookish Adventures mention this story, and it sounded pretty interesting. The title is obviously a reference to Hamlet's iconic monologue about contemplating suicide. This short story is a sci-fi dystopian where not only has overpopulation hit a critical mass, but scientists have also found a cure for aging, and natural death no longer exists. So now, because the planet cannot sustain any more lives, if a child is to be born, its parents must find someone to volunteer for elective suicide to balance out the population. Yeah, it's basically like the Futurama suicide booths. You just dial the number 2BR0 2B, not 2B. This was written back when people used letters, info numbers, and schedule your suicide appointment. This was an interesting story. Dark and bleak, and exactly what I would expect. Also, this was my first time reading Kurt Vonnegut. I don't expect I'll be rushing out to read more of him soon, but I am certainly open to reading more of his work at some point. My next 3 reads for the month were Agatha Christie, which I've covered already in my latest Agatha Christie video, linked up here and down there. First was Third Girl, a Poirot mystery where a woman kinda sorta confesses that she might be a murderer and then disappears. This one was really good and I clocked the killer really early on. Then there was Secret Adversary, the first Tommy and Tuppence novel. It was pretty good and I really liked seeing the origin story of some of these beloved characters. After that was the Sittaford mystery, a standalone novel where a seance reveals that their friend is dead, and by the time they get to his house to check on him, he has been murdered. I really enjoyed this one. I remember watching the adaptation where they shoved Miss Marple into it, so I already knew who done it and how, but I enjoyed catching those minute clues that I otherwise would have easily overlooked. Then I read George by Alex Gino, which is being reprinted under a new title, Melissa. I learned about this book through Kim at Middle of the Book March, and holy crap, I loved it so much. It made me cry so much. I have a whole video discussing it and crying over it here, so I don't need to get into it too much now. The short of it is that a little closeted trans girl wants to play Charlotte's Web in their school play so that people can finally start to see her as a girl, but her teacher won't allow it because she sees her as a boy. Oh, it's so good. So the reason I finished so few books this month is because I spent 3 whole weeks working my way through The House of Leaves. Oh my gosh, y'all. I read The House of Leaves. I was so anxious about reading this thing because it is massive. Over 700 pages. It's got a really complex meta inception-y sort of premise. So in the first layer of the story, we follow a man named Davidson, who moves into a home with his family and means to record a documentary about them adjusting to their new home. But then he discovers that their house measures 1/4 of an inch larger on the inside than outside, which is just physically impossible. So his documentary quickly shifts to trying to figure out the reality of this impossibility. The next layer of the story comes from a man named Zampano, who watches the finished Davidson documentary and transcribes it, then filling the pages with footnotes and references to help fill in the story and make sense of things. Finally, after Zampano's death, a guy named Johnny Truant gets a hold of Zampano's Davidson record, reads it, adds his own footnotes, and then finally sends it off to the editors to get it published. So yeah, there are a lot of layers in this book to follow along with. And it's written like an academic text, literally like a straight-up textbook, full of cited sources and analysis of everything, and everything in the book is treated as factual, except for when Johnny Truant comes in, because according to him, the Davidson documentary does not exist. The other fascinating thing about this book is its formatting. This is probably what it's best known for. Like, let me show you some pages. Certain words and phrases are printed in different color ink. Some text is crossed out. There's even different fonts depending on who wrote the footnote. Then there's sections like this where there is just so much going on the page. There's the main story here, footnotes down here, and continuations of other footnotes over here and in here. In contrast, there are pages where there's only a single sentence of text, sometimes even a single word. It is a unique read, and as a result of that, I gotta say, this was the best reading experience I have ever had. Y'all know I normally prefer short books that I can sprint through, but this book was a massive investment of time, and I was fully prepared to spend 2 whole months on it. But it only took me 3 weeks because I was so invested and I just could not stop reading it. It is fascinating. Sometimes you gotta hold the book upside down or sideways, and then a footnote references something in the appendix and you gotta go all the way to the back and read that. Reading this book is not a static experience. You are always moving it in unusual ways, and it is so much fun. It also works so well as a horror novel. This book does manage to get quite scary. The introduction alone had me so shaken up that I was afraid to continue reading. And the house itself is truly horrifying. I'm not gonna go into too much about what the house is really capable of, but the documentation of them traversing all of the house's secrets and the harrowing challenges to get out, oh, they were so good. Nobody in that house is safe, and you really cannot know what it's going to throw at you next. Oh, it's bloody brilliant. The only thing I didn't love about House of Leaves was Johnny Truant. That's the guy who found Zampano's transcript of the Davidson record and then filled it with his own notes. I really never connected with that character. And he taught us right from the beginning that he was not to be trusted, that he was a master bullshitter and a pathological liar. So I didn't feel compelled to read any of his ramblings since I couldn't believe that what he was saying was even true. And like, he would add a footnote and it would just go on and on and on for several pages, having nothing to do with the Davidson record, just sharing anecdotes from his own life, mostly sexual conquests and shit. I don't want to read about that. It's not like he was some fascinating queer character discovering their sexuality. It's a cis straight man writing about all the bitches he's fucked and how depressed he is. Like, no man, I am not interested. So I found myself often skimming over his sections or skipping them entirely. I also read House of Leaves with a group on Discord, organized by Sina over at Beating Around the Books. I really valued reading this book with a group because we all read this book differently. I read it just for pure enjoyment, occasionally underlining a thing or two, but not doing much of that. Others treated it like they were actually studying it like a proper textbook, actively taking their own notes, writing in the margins, drawing all these connections and finding Easter eggs that I would have missed. So I definitely recommend that if you're attempting to read this book, do so with a buddy. But yeah, House of Leaves is an unparalleled reading experience. And while it may be intimidating as fuck, it is so worth it. I finished 2 audiobooks this month, both of which were Dickens. The first, which I began after DNFing David Copperfield, was The Mystery of Edwin Drood. I chose this one for a couple of reasons. First, because it's a mystery, and y'all know I love my mysteries. The other was because it was shorter. After giving up on David Copperfield, I wanted to try something where even if I didn't get along with it, I could at least finish it. The reason it's shorter is because it's incomplete. Dickens died before finishing it. It's a shame the book was never finished, but to be honest though, I wasn't really invested in any of these characters or their relationships, so I'm not too pressed over not having an ending. When I was done, I was just like, well, alright then. I've done a little research about it, and apparently Dickensian scholars have chosen a canon ending for it. And while I agree with their decision, who they chose, it was also the most obvious one. I don't know. It was okay. But when I finished that, there were only a few days left until Christmas. So I decided to listen to the Charles Dickens Christmas classic, A Christmas Carol. Oh my gosh. Wow. That was so good. It's much shorter than most of his work, and I feel like that did wonders for the pacing and storytelling. This was by far my favorite Dickens yet. I loved the first stave, where Scrooge shows his horrible nature and is then visited by the ghost of his business partner. Oh, it was done so well. It is clear why this has become a permanent cultural fixture. The story is genius and told impeccably well. I think that even if you're not usually a fan of Dickens, or even reading classics in general, this one could be a safe venture because it is so short, and the story it tells is so good, and one that you're probably already well acquainted with. Definitely one that's worth a read. The final book I read in December was One by One by Ruth Ware. I wanted to read this one because it's an isolated closed circle mystery set in the French Alps at a chalet that's just been snowed in during an avalanche. Oh, it just seemed like the perfect December Christmas time read. And the mystery of the book was an homage to And Then There Were None, where guests at the chalet begin to die off one by one. Ah, you get it? And then the survivors have to figure out who done it. This was really fun and fitting for the holiday season. I clocked who did it right before the halfway point, and I was right in all my interpretations of the clues. I suppose with my extensive mystery reading, I'm getting better at spotting and interpreting these clues, but I did feel like this one was pretty heavy-handed, really laying it all out without explicitly saying it. Eventually it was like, just come on, figure it out already. But no, it was good. Not great, but good. And I enjoyed reading it. So those are all the books that I read in December. So now let's take a look at some of the stats from my reading this year. I read 151 books in 2021. That is 10 times the amount that I read in 2020. 108 of those were full-length novels, 30 were short stories, and 12 were audiobooks. In terms of genre, my most read was obviously mysteries with 61, then 22 horror/thriller, 15 classics, 8 sci-fi and fantasy, 8 children's books, 7 nonfiction, and a shocking 10 romance. My most read author was obviously Agatha Christie, with 42 books read. No other author even comes close. Over a quarter of all the books I read this year were Agatha Christie. So I've usually considered myself somebody who doesn't read many male authors, but 41 of the books that I read this year were written by men. That's almost equivalent to the amount of Christies that I read. So apparently I do read quite a few men after all. So there you have my December reading wrap-up and 2021 stats. Have you read any of these? What did you think of them? How many books did you read last year? Did you have a favorite? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if it pleases and sparkles, I'll see you in the next video. Mwah!